The next tool we're going to cover is the table saw, and it's our fifth step in our squaring process. So we're going to make sure we're ready to get started with our table saw. Operate only with instruction after you've received all the safety instruction for the machine. Take care of jewelry, hairs tied up and back, loose clothing is taken care of, tucked in, and you're ready to go. Make sure guards are in place and operating properly. Okay, we have a Brett guard on this table saw. So I have it over so you can see the blade right here. The guard is back a little bit, so we're going to shift the guard to cover that blade. We have a T-handled Allen wrench. We're going to loosen the set screws so that we can adjust that. Slide the guard out so it's just covering the blade, and then we're going to tighten up the set screws. We have our safety glasses on and we're ready to go. And now we're going to make the adjustments we need before we start. Okay. Our guard is lowered down. I'm going to lower that a little bit so there's not quite as much clearance. And when I lower the guard, I always go back the other way because there's a little bit of play in the handle. Make sure it starts to go back up and then it's set. Okay, that's a good height. Okay, it's going to have clearance on the board, but it is covering the blade. One of the main parts of the table saw that you're going to use and adjust is the fence. Okay, the fence will set your width on how wide we're going to cut our board. On the rail out in the front here, there's a ruler, and there's a small red line on the fence, on a bracket, and you flip the handle up right here, it unlocks it, and you slide it across the table. When you're adjusting the fence, make sure you slide it from back here. If you reach out and try to push the front, it twists and it won't slide. So we slide it from back here, and we're going to set that to our width. Okay, this board is around 8 inches wide. I'm going to set it to 7 inches. We'll cut a 7-inch board. So I'm going to move that over, get it set right on our line, lock it down. Sometimes when you lock it, it will move a tiny bit. So you can unlock it again, tap it back over where you want, and lock it down. I always just make sure it's locked in place. Okay, and we're ready to cut our board. Okay. Another tool that you might use with the table saw is a miter gauge. The miter gauge is this tool. Okay, you can see that. And it looks like a T. Has a handle up here, and you can actually twist that and set different angles. We have it locked in and set to 0 right now. Okay. If you're using the miter gauge, you are actually cutting a board sideways through the table saw. The number one rule with the miter gauge, you never use the miter gauge and the fence at the same time. Because if we would do that, you could pinch between the two and it could cause a kickback. Okay, so we'll set the miter gauge out of the way for right now. And we're going to go over using the fence and ripping the board. Ripping is going with the grain. Cross-cutting, as with the radial arm saw, is what we would do with the miter gauge. We have our board ready. Saw blade should be extended above the workpiece, approximately 1/4 of an inch, or the gullets of the blade. Each blade has a dip between each tooth. That's the gullet of the blade. Rule of thumb for measurement wise, we say 1/4 of an inch above our workpiece. Okay. When you use the table saw, you have to use the fence or the miter gauge. Okay. You never saw freehand, which would mean you would just hold it and push it through the blade, because it would be basically impossible to hold it steady in a straight line the whole way through. So use the fence or the miter gauge. Never, as you're running, never reach over the saw blade directly. Okay, you'll be off to the side. Okay, and use extra care and precaution when sawing large material or when we use a dado or mortar cutting head. One really nice thing here is we have a secondary table saw. It's a little bit smaller that we use for the dado blade, so that we don't have to switch the blade back and forth from one class period to the next. We have it set up and ready to go, so people don't have to wait to change that out. Use a push stick. We're going to have a push stick with the table saw. The type of push stick we're using looks like this. See the little notch right here, it's at 90 degrees, is going to fit on the back of the board. Anytime your hand would appear within 6 inches of the blade, you're going to use the push stick. If you have a really wide board and your hand is far away from the blade, you don't have to use that push stick. You have a little more control with your hand as long as you're at least 6 inches away from that blade. Never stand in line or directly behind the blade while operating. Okay, let me move this over a little bit to demonstrate. Okay, so as I am processing this board, I am not standing in line or behind. Okay, remember we're processing forward, do not stand behind. If I'm pushing this board forward and it happens to fly backwards, I would not be in line with this board, it would hit me. If you're standing here, it could hit you and cause some major damage. Okay, so again, I'm going to set this up to 7 inches. Cut off the edge. Okay, and the way that we want to hold this, okay, if you can see, I'm holding 1 or 2 fingers on the top of the board. The rest of my hand is pushing against the side, in against the fence. Okay, my back hand, my thumb is down, and my hand is on top like this. Okay, so it's facing like that. That way, when you get to the table, you don't have to switch your hands around and take them off of the board. Okay, so my left hand is going to be in place right here, and as I push the board through, I am basically just walking my hand along that edge, but the board is moving forward, so my left hand is actually never going to move until I take it away from there. Okay, my right hand is just pushing it through. Again, if you start like this, you get here and you kind of have to flip your arm around and it's a little weird. Okay, so we're going to start it up. I'm going to run it through. Start the blade. It starts very quickly, so you want to make sure your board is not up against the blade, not too close. I have it pushed in against the edge. I'm off to the side. Standing off to the side, our scrap strip is sitting in there, so we want to make sure we're out of the way, so if that would catch somehow, I'm out of the way. You saw as I ran that through, the board did pop up just a tiny bit when it started to cut. My left hand was on it, I instantly pushed it back down, had it under control. The board is pressed down and tight against the fence. Your push stick is ready to go. Once you push it forward, and the back is up to your left hand, you're going to hook your left thumb on the back, get the push stick, and put the push stick on the board to finish the cut. Left hand in place, pushing down and in against the fence. Hook your left thumb on the back, get the push stick on the board, left hand out of the way, and complete the cut. Left hand in place, pushing down and in against the fence. Hook your left thumb on the back, get the push stick on the board, left hand out of the way, and complete the cut. Okay, the blade is stopped. I'm going to walk around. Now the table saw is one that normally you will always have someone catching the board for you. The person catching the board, as that comes through, their only job is to hold the end of that board as you push it off the table and to keep it from falling on the floor. The person catching is not pulling the board through. They are not doing the work. The person on that side running the machine is doing all the work. Again, person catching is just keeping it from falling on the floor. Okay? So don't remove any scraps or short pieces when the saw is running. Wait until it's come to a complete stop. Okay. Now, if you have a panel or something you have to trim to exact length and you didn't have a radial arm saw, or maybe this is too wide for the radial arm saw, this board's not, but we'll just pretend it is for right now. You slide the fence out of the way, and we would bring the miter gauge over. It's actually got a roller on here, so it drops down into this T slot and it can't come out of there. So don't try to lift that up because you'll break it. Okay? So this would go in our miter gauge. Okay? And this is a little bit different than the way we run everything else. And you're going to have your right hand on the front. Do not have your thumb sticking out in the direction of the blade. Have it in line just on top of the board. My left hand is on the handle of the miter gauge. I'm going to start the blade, and I'm going to pull back against the miter gauge as I push forward. Push it out, slide it over out of the way, pull it back. And notice during that operation, my left hand was on the handle, never came off of that handle, because when you're pushing this through, your left hand is pretty close to that blade as you run it through. So I kept it on there the whole time, pulled it back before I moved my left hand. Again, our board is in place against the face of the miter gauge. Your right hand is holding the board down and back against the miter gauge. Your left hand is on the handle. If the board's small enough, you can hook your thumb on the back of the board. If it's wider, just keep your thumb back, not out to the side. You don't want that sticking out anywhere close to the blade, so have that back. And turn it on. Push it all the way through, slide it out, pull it back. Keeping your left hand on the handle as you finish, and pull it back so that you don't get close to the blade. And just stay out of the way of your scraps until the blade comes to a complete stop, and then you can clear off the table. And turn it on. Push it all the way through, slide it out, pull it back. Keeping your left hand on the handle as you finish, and pull it back so that you don't get close to the blade. And just stay out of the way of your scraps until the blade comes to a complete stop, and then you can clear off the table. Okay, and that trimmed the end of that board nicely. Again, if you're doing a square panel that's 24 inches square or something like that, you would cut the edge 24 and then you would spin it and use a miter gauge. We actually have several different miter gauges. One that looks like this that comes with the machine, and we have ones that we've made that are for bigger panels, as well as a very large miter gauge that we use for things like plywood. Big miter gauge like this, it runs along this rail, okay, and we can run really big pieces. Once you're finished at the table saw, you can lower the blade down below the table if no one's going to use it right after you. If someone is in line to use it right away, as long as everything's come to a full stop, you can gather your things and move away, and they can set up for what they need. That way we don't have to take the blade up and down between every single person.